Tafayin Dalet Amud Beis, 4 lines from the top. We're holding in the middle of the sugya of Keboiloi Kach Polte, that we say when something absorbs, when meat absorbs something, it absorbs, in this case, dam, the same way, in the same manner that it absorbs it, it expels it. So therefore, the case we had previously is if you had the behema that it was stuffed with meat inside, and it was roasted, it's mutter. Now, even though the meat inside absorbs the dam, some of the blood from the behema, but we say, keboiloi kach polte, it absorbed it through roasting, it will expel it through the roasting as well. So therefore, whatever dam it absorbed, it will now draw, the roasting will draw it out, and therefore it's mutter. So let's bring a raya to that from the following. Ravin, he would coat a goizla, a pigeon, the bird, he would coat it, and he would coat it with a coating, and he served it to Rav. And Rav said to them, he said, if it tastes good, give it to me and I'll eat. So now he's coating the oif, he's coating the meat. So let's assume it's something in the manner of a knish, or it's a batter that coats it, and therefore it's covered. So therefore it's similar to the meat that's inside of the behemoth. Therefore the coating, if we say that, if we don't say keboiloi kach polte, then we would say, well, whatever dam was expelled from the meat, would be absorbed into the coating, into the wrapping of it, and therefore it should be also. And yet he said, if it tastes good, then I will eat it. So don't you see from here, isn't this a raya that we say keboiloi kach polte, that even if it absorbed the dam, the same way it absorbed it, it will expel it. It will now draw it out, the roasting will draw it out, and therefore it's mutter. The Gemara says no. That was covering over there was with fine flour, demiparer, it crumbles. Meaning, if it was like a knish, if it was a coating that was mamish wrapped in it, then perhaps not. Perhaps we would not say keboiloi kach polte. But over here we're talking about where it's made with fine flour and it crumbles, so there's cracks and there's openings and there's crevices. So that allows the dam to escape. But if it's completely enclosed, perhaps we won't say that. So therefore, you have no raya from it. Rava once went to the Reish Galusa bar Avza, and they breaded a goose for him. And the tafel bar Gavza, and Omer, he said, Eloi de chazisa de zig ke zuza chevara loy achle minei. I had not seen that it was so clear, that I have not seen that a zig ke zuza chevara, that it was clear like white glass, that it was so clear like I wouldn't have eaten from it. So if I hadn't seen that the juice that came out, that was absorbed into the breading, was so clear, I wouldn't eat. Now, if you say that we do say keboiloi kach polte, my ear ki zig, avil ki loy zig, nami. Why does it have to be clear? Even if it wasn't clear, even if it was slightly red. If I say keboiloi kach polte, I would say that whenever blood was absorbed, would be drawn out by the fire. Keboiloi kach polte. And what remains is not blood. If there's a reddish color, well, that reddish color we would attribute it to juices from it, not from the blood. So if you say keboiloi kach polte, why does it have to be perfectly clear? Elamai, isn't that a raya that we don't say keboiloi kach polte? Meaning, as Rabbeinu Dovid speaks out, that the blood, we would say that blood is easier to be drawn out than juices. So if we would say keboiloi kach polte, then we would say, well, it's red. Now that red, we would say it's not blood, because blood keboiloi kach polte. Keboiloi kach polte is by blood, we say that. Now it doesn't necessarily apply to other juices. Other juices might be absorbed and harder to remove. It's not as slippery. It's not as doesn't flow as easily as blood. So if there is a reddish color, we would attribute to juices that don't flow out as easily, that aren't drawn out by the roasting as easily. But over here, he insisted that it be perfectly clear. Well, doesn't that show you that we don't say keboy lekach polter? More answers, Hasam bechivate de shoyer. Over there, it's talking with a type of white flour, which is hard. And over there, it does not have the same properties as the flour we were discussing before, which crumbles and cracks and allows the blood to flow out easily. Over here, we're talking about this type of flour, which is not as crumbly. And therefore, in this case, we won't say keboy lekach polter. So what's the halach is the smida, if it's made of very fine flour, ben asmik ben loy asmik shori, whether it turned red or not, it's mutter because we say keboy lekach polter. So that is in this case of the smida. The chivat, if the bread is made of white flour, which doesn't crumble so easily, izik zuza chivora shoya. If it's clear like white glass, it's mutter. Eloi also, if not, it's also. Dishar kamalchim, other types of flour. Asmik also, if it turns red, it's also. Loi asmik, it's mutter. But if it's not red, then it's mutter. Meaning, if it's only slightly red, then it's mutter. But if it has a real red color, it has a bright red color, then that would be, we would attribute that to dam. So then we would say in those kind types of flours, we won't say that keboy lekach polter necessarily, and therefore, if it has a bright red color, it's also. Haimuloi, so the case we talked about before, where the roasted animal had the stuffed meat, the raw meat stuffed inside. The one who answered, he answers even if the opening, where it's cut open, it's facing down, so it's easier for the blood to draw down, to flow downward. He still answers, and the one that says it's mutter, even if it's faced up. The halach is mulaisa shori. It's mutter afilu puma le'el, even if it's faced up. Now, Toisa has a kasha. How can we say that the one that answers even when it's faced down? Well, we learned in the Mishnah that there was a Mount Omer who said that the Korban Pesach was roasted. That's the way it was roasted, with the innards and the legs and the inside. And the reason that we were mattering over there, because we said we mattered because it was face down and the blood would draw out and it would drip down. So you see that it's mutter if it's face down. Taisus answers, he says, because over there by the Korban Pesach, the opening is, with a cut, the shlit, the opening by the neck is wide. So there's room for the blood to drain out. But over here, when they stuffed took the raw meat and they stuffed it inside, the opening was narrow. So therefore, the one who answers, he says it's also, even if it's face down, because the opening is not that wide. If there's a raw piece of meat, which has a reddish color, that has a deep red color. Now, in terms of introduction, it's important to note some of the following principles. That dam evorim shaloi pirish, if you have blood that is absorbed that's part of the meat, that's absorbed into the meat, and it's there in its natural state, so that blood is not awesome. That's mutter. That's considered the meat itself. It's considered part of the meat itself. The blood that has come out, been drawn out, so either it's blood that has been secreted, that it oozed out from the meat, or if it's blood that's in a blood vessel or major arteries that is collected over there, that blood is awesome. So when we say that we have to kasher meat before cooking, really you shouldn't have to kasher it, because if the dam is there in the meat, then that blood is mutter. The reason we say we have to kasher it is because when you cook it, the blood oozes out, and then that blood is pirish, it'll get reabsorbed. So therefore it's awesome. However, that's why by roasting, it's a different consideration. By roasting, the blood that drips down it does not get reabsorbed. It drips and it drains away. So it doesn't get reabsorbed. So for that reason, we don't need the same koshering. So therefore, Rashi says it only needs lightly salting. It doesn't need heavy salting. Tosfos says it doesn't even need salting. So that's when you have the meat that is in its natural state. Now here we're talking about meat that has a deep red color. That means is that the blood is not there in its natural state. The blood over there, due to some either bruising or in some internal bleeding, the blood was purish. So you see the red color. So that blood has to be removed. So in such a case, when you have umsa or you have beya, you have the beitzim of the animal. So here we have, again, according to some shitas, we're talking where it has a bright red color, or we're talking, alternatively, we're talking in its natural state. That in its natural state, it has blood, it has dam shapirish. So in such a case also, we have to have extra type of koshering. So Rashi says that we're talking about in the same way as umsa. Tosfos says it's in its natural state, mizuki, or you have the major artery of the neck. So there's a deposit of blood. So that blood has to be removed. So pligi bo ravacha v'ravina b'chol Torah kula. Generally throughout the Torah, when they argue, ravacha l'chumra, ravina l'kula. That's normally, generally, how they argue. The Ravacha is Machmer, Ravina is Mekel, and Vehilchasek, Ravina Lakula. And we pass kind of like Ravina Lakula. Lebar Mahane class, except for these three cases, the Ravacha Lakula, Ravina Lachumra, Vehilchasek, Ravacha Lakula. And we pass kind of like Ravacha Lakula. The Kitzer, in the Machlekes between them, we always pass kind of Lakula. So, what are these? What's the loch over here? Hi umsa da asm. If you have the piece of meat that turned red, so we know that there's been some internal bleeding. So that blood has to be removed. So you have to kash it. If you cut it and salt it, then if you look there, sure, it's mutar even to cook in a pot, because if you cut it and salt it, it'll drain out the blood, and therefore no blood will come out that will be reabsorbed. Shafte bishvuda shori. If you roasted it on a spit, then it's mutar, made of dye, because through the roasting it will draw out the blood from roasting it. So therefore that's roasting, which we learned before, the machlokes of Rashi and Tosfos, where it needs slight salting or it doesn't need salting at all, because the roasting will draw out the blood. But if you put it on coal, you roast it on coals. So there, pligi baravacha ravina. Here we have a machlekes. Chad asa v'chad shari. One says it's mutar, one says it's also. Man da asa, the one that says it's also, maset samis. He says the heat of the coals doesn't draw out the blood. It's not the intensity of roasting. It's not right on the fire, and therefore it will cause it to shrivel, and will retain the blood. It won't draw out the blood. Among the Shorei, Mishav Shoiv, he holds that the heat will draw out the blood. V'helchasam Mishoiv Shoiv, that it draws out the blood. V'chein, Beya, the same thing by Beya, Chadchinu, Malchina, if you look at the Shoiv. If you cut it and salt it, it's mutar even for cooking in a pot. Talina B'shvuda Shorian. If you suspend it from a spit and roast it on the fire, it's mutar, made of dye, because the blood will flow out through the roasting. Achtino agumara, if you roast it on coals. So pligiba ravacha v'ravina. That's a machlekes. Chad also v'chad shori. Man also matzah somis. He says the heat of the coals causes it to shrivel. Uman the shori mishav shoiv. He says it draws out the blood. V'chein mizuki, and similarly the artery of the neck. If you cut it and salt it, it's mutar even for cooking. It's cooking in a pot. If you spend it on a spit, then you say beis hashchita l'satoi. If the place where it was cut, the beis hashchita, is facing down, the incision is facing downward, sure, it's mutar, because it will now drain down. Made of dye, the blood flows out through where it was cut. Achte agumra pliguravacha ravina. Chad also v'chad shori. Man also matzu some. The one who also says that it will cause it to shrivel. It'll matzu somis, and therefore it'll retain the blood. Uman the shori mishav shoiv. Ve'helchasa shoyiv, and the halacha is lakulu, like we said, that it's shoyiv. Hi umsa da asmik. So regarding the piece of meat that turned red, so it turned red as a result of the blood that was purish. So this blood has to be removed. You have to kasher it. Chalya aser. The chalya is aser. So after the roasting it, the chalya is aser. So one pshat is the gravy, and another pshat that Rashi brings two pshatim. The second pshat is that after the roasting, they soaked it in vinegar to remove the remnants of the blood. So the meat is mutter, but what comes out, the gravy from it, or the vinegar, is also, because we say that it has some of the remnants of the blood are either in these juices or in the vinegar. That's a Rashi pshat. Taisus asks, how's it shaykh to say that the meat is mutter, and yet the juice that comes out of it will be aser? If you say that the juice that's inside, that still remains inside, that's in the gravy, or that comes and is mixed into the vinegar that you soak it in, if that juice is considered to be blood, how can you say that the meat is mutter? Then how could the meat over there be mutter? That means that you have blood that's in the meat that's not in its natural state, because we're talking about umsa da asmik. That means that the meat was red, so there was blood that was purish. So how can you say that the meat is mutter and yet the juice is also? The Sasav's answers, he says that according to Rashi, enechanami, this juice is still considered to be blood. This reddish juice is considered to be blood, but when it's in the meat, since you've already roasted it, since the blood has essentially been drawn out, all that's left over there, the remnants, are mute. And as long as it's in the meat, it's bottled. But when it's in the gravy, or if it's in the vinegar, it's not bottled, so therefore it's also. So that high umsa, the meat that turned red, chalyas loyasmek, but if it didn't turn red, so it's regular meat, so chalya shari, the gravy is mutter. Ravina says, afil loyasuk nami. He said, even if it didn't turn red, chalya also, the chalya is also, because iyasha the less beisharaika dama, because it's not likely or not shaykh that it did not have, that the gravy or the vinegar did not have some traces of blood. Meaning, the case that we're talking about over here is where it was roasted on coals. It was roasted on coals, and we had the machlekes before if the roasting on coals draws out all the blood or causes it to shrivel. Ravina l'shitosai, he says that it causes it to shrivel, and therefore not all the blood is drawn out. So therefore, he says, even if it's a regular piece of meat, it still would be awesome. Why is that? Because since the roasting on the coals doesn't draw out all the blood and causes it to shrivel, now maybe there's some blood that is not in its natural state. During the course of the roasting, it's not in its natural state, but it's not all been drawn out. And therefore, you still have some traces of the blood, and in the gravy you still have some traces of the blood, or in the vinegar you have some traces of the blood, and therefore l'shitosa, that's why he holds it's also. He used to swallow it. He used to swallow the vinegar or the gravy. He held it was mutter. He himself used to swallow it. He said his father had the minig, that the vinegar that the roasted meat was soaked in at one time to draw out the blood. He didn't use it further, he didn't use it after that to use it again, to use it for kashering. So that what is that any different than challah, which is weak, which is naturally weak, that can use it? You don't have to use vinegar that has the full strength. Any regular vinegar that you use is kosher and is suitable for kashering. So you're telling me that you used it once, so it weakened it, so he wouldn't use it again. Well, what's that any different from vinegar that's already in a weakened state, which is mutter? Or answers Hassam Isa Lakiyu the Parabene. there it has the natural strength of the fruit is still there. But but here the natural strength of the fruit is not there. Now, even though the taste of it is weakened, but that's only the taste of it. But this natural strength of the fruit, which is there, which draws out, which has the property to draw out the blood, even in the weakened vinegar, the vinegar that doesn't taste as sharp, it still has that property, and therefore it's suitable for kashing. But once it kashered once, then that the kiyu, the strength of the fruit, is not present to the same extent, and therefore he would not use it.